Good afternoon. This is Jim
Hello.
Houston from JD Power. Oh, go ahead.
Hello, everyone,
Go
and
ahead,
thank you
Bianca.
so much
Sorry.
for joining us. That's okay. So as Jim said, my name is Bianca Schroeder, and I am the marketing lead for the automotive finance practice here at JD Power. And I'm very excited to offer this webcast today with our automotive finance all-star team, Jim Houston, Lisa Stymack, and Patrick Rosenberg. So for today's webcast, we're going to be discussing dealer relationship optimization. And so I'd like to go ahead and before we get started with Jim, Lisa, and Patrick's presentation, I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a poll. So we'd like to know about your role within your organization so that we can get a better idea about how it is that we can help your business to grow in the way of dealer relationship optimization as it relates to your particular role at your organization. So I'll go ahead and start the poll right now. Please go ahead and complete it. And then I will go ahead and close the poll out as soon as we get the responses. Excellent. It looks like 100% of attendees have participated in the poll, so I'm going to go ahead and close that out now. Thank you so much for your participation in that. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and hand over the presentation to Jim Houston, our Senior Director of Automotive Finance here at JD Power. And just a quick note, if you do have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and ask them in the questions panel. And we'll go ahead and make sure that at the end of today's webcast, we address those. If we don't have quite enough time to get to those questions, we'll be sure to follow up with you afterwards. Okay, so with no further ado, I'll go ahead and transfer it over to Jim. Jim?
Hey, thank you, Bianca. So hopefully everyone can see our screen. We thank everyone on the phone today for participating in the webinar. And we thought it was important, Patrick, myself, and Lisa, to sort of do an interim step between what was our scorecard calls a couple of weeks ago and what will be our executive on-site presentations regarding individual scores, but talk about it more in relation to the bigger picture, what's going on in the industry, specifically in Canada, and around some of the changes we made to the study last year and the way the results played out this year. So as you all know, this is the second year of the redesigned study, and the three of us are excited to share those results. We think relationship continues to be the main focus from a dealer perspective. And I want to make sure everyone's comfortable in the fact that we know and understand that all things considered, if you were to change your risk tolerance and or your program parameters or have a phenomenally low rate in the marketplace based on the market conditions, that is going to impact dealer satisfaction. So we are in no way, shape, or form saying that the product offering is outside the scope of satisfaction. However, all things being considered equal, we think that the relationship drives the highest level of satisfaction. And we thought it important for us to highlight some of those significant findings before we come out and deliver each of the individual presentations. So for today's discussion, we really want to talk about the 2018 dealer satisfaction model. We'd like to talk about the driving factors within the relationship and some business fundamentals to help drive success. We plan to cover the following in about 30 minutes, give or take. We hope that if there are questions, you respond back to Bianca, as she indicated earlier, and then feel free to submit as we go. If there are some questions that we don't understand or there needs some additional clarification and or data analysis from us, we will happily answer those at a future date. So as everyone's aware of, we have the JD Power Dealer Finance Satisfaction Model. As we know, we split it into two, right? So we have a captive retail credit satisfaction index and a non-captive retail credit satisfaction index. We did not include floor plan this year, so we consider that as an opportunity based on individual representation and some opportunity maybe in 2019 to resurrect that in a way that is more functional given the feedback we got at our roundtable. So as you understand, the 2018 models are no different than 2017. It's interesting, based on the feedback you gave us, that we opened the number of lenders that a dealer could select from 4 to 8. So we had some consternation internally that we thought, well, maybe the models themselves would change. What we found, though, was that by allowing dealers to pick more than 4 lenders, we got a much larger segment of the banking business. So those non-captive lenders, about a 30% increase in total participation. But when you look at both of the models, both on the left-hand side and the right-hand side, captive versus non-captive, the highest driver of satisfaction is relationship. So on the left-hand side, 40% relationship is based on the captive model, and that's broken down into about 39% on the sales rep and 61% on the credit staff. On the right-hand side, very similar numbers, a little higher, though, from a relationship perspective, 55%, so much higher based on relationship in a non-captive environment, although the sales rep relationship then is a larger portion of that at 58% versus the credit staff relationship at 42%. And we understand from a business perspective that's driven by a lot of the changes in programs and the understanding of the captive finance retail credit rep to be able to articulate and dictate what that program is to a dealer on a regular basis. And so that encompasses both what my credit parameters are on the buy side, as well as what my lease parameters are in terms of what changes on a quarterly basis, or in some cases a monthly, given there's OEM subvention out there. So if we break it down and look strictly at the captive model, they're both the same and similar, but they have distinct differences. So let's review the attributes of the captive model. So looking at the captive, and we break it down left side, right side, and we will only focus on the relationship side of the business. So again, as I stated earlier, we do understand that application approval process is important from the dealer's perspective, as well as what the program offering is, but this is really focused solely on those things that are probably a little bit more controllable within the business, because you can't dictate what rates are given what the markets are, and sometimes you cannot dictate what your program is based on what the OEM flavor of the day is. So when we look at the captive side of the business, Retail Credit Satisfaction Index, so again, as I stated earlier, 40% is built on relationship. On the left-hand side, we talk about the sales rep. So as you recall, in years past, we focused solely on what that sales relationship was. In 2017, we asked a battery of questions related to the delivery of a presentation and or the visit of a sales rep at the dealership. In 2018, we removed those questions because we thought it was a little bit redundant, given that dealers had indicated when relationship managers should be in the store, what time of the day, and how often they should repeat. So we looked at really what are those key attributes of a sales rep that dealers are looking at. So on the left-hand side, you can see the sales representative's attire for dealership business. And when we say attire, again, it's, yeah, how do I dress, but how do I show up? What do I look like when I show up to the dealership? Am I prepared? Do I have the information I need? Do I show up in a fully washed car that represents the organization I do business with? How responsive am I to the needs of a particular dealership, right? So if I'm called, am I responding in an appropriate manner? How useful are my visits? And I say this tongue-in-cheek because I was a DRM years ago, and quite frankly, some of the visits years ago probably didn't have a whole lot of value for the dealership, other than they may have had value for me as on my way home from 3 other prior visits. So how useful is that visit, and is it in conjunction with what the dealer's trying to accomplish? How knowledgeable is my rep in the industry? So do I understand what's going on in the marketplace? And that's beyond just what car sales are, but what's happening? What are the trends? What are the things that are hot in the marketplace? And what are the things that dealerships may be thinking about in terms of what's next for me? How much does that sales rep know about the dealership, right? So that's 12%. And it's really, do I understand the business goals of that particular dealership? Does my organization as a whole understand those? Am I able to articulate that back up to the chain of command such that I have a CRM tool that identifies what exactly is ABC Motors trying to accomplish, and how can we help them accomplish that? How clear is my level of communication? Am I able to communicate appropriately what the goals are of my organization, what changes are in my organization, and does that translate into an appropriate conversation at the dealer level? And then, what is really has always been an important aspect of the sales relationship is, am I timely notifying my dealerships that there's been a change in my program? And when we say change in program or updates, a lot of people ask us, well, I can fax out, or I can email out, or I can text out a rate sheet. Well, it's beyond just the rate sheet. It's really about things that are important from a dealership perspective. And I'll go a step further and say a little bit deeper is, if your organization is making a change, and let's say it's a risk change, so you've determined for whatever reason there's a subset of credit that is creating a much higher loss rate than what's tolerable to the organization, explaining that to your dealer client in a timely, appropriate way, explaining how that manages back to the overall organizational strategy is very important. Hence, you avoid applications coming in 2 weeks after the fact that you made that change. And then you avoid the argument that occurs or the conversation. I say argument because it's not necessarily an argument, but it could be a heated discussion about, well, 2 weeks ago, your reps bought this deal. Today, they're not buying it. You didn't explain that to me, so why is that happening?
I think it's also important to note that, especially with the captive model here, that you're going to have less pushback from the dealer saying, I need you to give an exception. I need you to put this in the program. I know the program ended. I need that interest rate or that program, because we know that the dealers do push back on the captives around the programs.
So if we move to the right side and we think about the credit staff relationship, again, we're talking in the captive realm. 40% is based on relationship. Understandably, there's a larger portion that's going to be based on programs. Sometimes as a lender, you're going to be negatively impacted given the OEM program might not be the program the dealer wants, or it's not sort of contiguous from the program that was the month before. But that credit staff relationship drives 61% of that total 40%. And that's driven by the attribute side of the credit staff's responsiveness. So as you've all seen, we've asked the question the last couple of years, am I able to get a hold of the credit desk when I need them? And we've structured that sort of conversation across the industry to say, you've created a whole number of avenues by which you can communicate with your F&I managers. And that's either through Route 1 Dealer Track, your own portal, some text message, an email, some sort of ability, non-telephone related, to contact that particular F&I manager. But the converse is, if I'm an F&I manager and I need to speak with my credit rep because there is something that's changed dramatically in the structure of a particular deal or something different than what was originally communicated, I need them immediately. So how responsive is that credit staff? How knowledgeable is that credit staff for the dealership, right? So understanding this particular dealership sends me X number of applications a month. I cash a large portion of those, so their efficiency ratio is pretty high. Also, by the way, their portfolio provides me with a pretty liquid ability. So liquidity's there. There's not a lot of delinquency. So do I know that? Am I aware of that? How well does the credit staff understand the industry? Again, thinking about the same side as the sales side, do I understand what's going on in the marketplace? What are the changes that are occurring? Am I able to articulate those and have that conversation that makes me an industry expert? How willing and able am I to restructure an application? So this is always a bit of a contentious point. Years ago, we asked the question about exceptions. We took exceptions out because we don't want to have a lender being the number one in exceptions. However, there needs to be a dialogue in a way for, especially on the captive side, for lenders to be able to tell dealers that, I would be willing and able in this particular case to purchase this particular contract or this customer based on the following. So that may be more down payment, that may be a lesser term, that might be a lesser car. But that's a dialogue they need to be able to have and articulate that appropriately. And that pulls into the bottom piece there. It says, how clear am I in my communication, right? So you told me X, I went back and did X, but you weren't clear, so there was some miscommunication. So both the verbal communication at the dealer level, as well as the internal communication back to those that have a credit team in understanding what did I discuss with that dealer such that it's documented. So when the dealer calls back in and says, well, I just talked to Patrick Rosenberg and he told me X. Oh, that's right. Patrick has documented that, so we have that information. So while we know the captive model and bank models are similar and have distinct differences, the captive model is very heavily laden towards the credit staff relationship. And because of programs that OEMs provide, dealers want their captives to be on top of programs and program changes, and their first point of contact, as you've all seen in the data, is the retail credit desk. Now, when we think about this from an organizational perspective, we think that these results may spur internal discussion amongst yourselves as to what the future organizational structure looks like, what investments you might make from a credit perspective, right? Do I build out a credit decisioning machine that gives me an opportunity to look at real-time data on a daily basis? And do I think about what job responsibilities do I put into the marketplace? I would even go so as far as to saying that do I have my best people in front of the dealer on a regular basis? And if I thought about that, I probably would have my retail credit staff being my most senior, my most knowledgeable, and my most available employees in the organization. So we turn to the banking side of the business, so the non-captive side, and you can see the relationship jumps from 40 to 55%. The sales rep relationship dominates that at 58% versus 42% in the credit staff. You see on the attribute side on the left, they're very similar, right? So there's not a whole lot of differentiation, although there's a few more there. So how useful was that visit by my sales rep? How do they show up? Again, maybe a little less important on the non-captive side versus the captive side, because I think most captives think that their rep's going to show up in a branded product, right? So if I'm representing brand X and I show up in brand Y's car, that might cause me some consternation, right? Because I like my parking lot to look like the cars I sell. How responsive is my sales rep to contacting me, right, and when I contact them? Again, do I get timely notification of program changes? And so there's a sort of a connect-disconnect there, right? So OEM programs are going to change monthly. They're going to change bi-monthly based on residual changes. They're going to change quarterly based on targets, and they're going to change annually based on production charges. Bank programs are going to change based on market conditions. So rates are going to go up, and rates are going to go down. Delinquency is going to go up, and delinquency is going to go down. So there's a differentiation in terms of when those changes occur, but I need to understand them specifically when they occur. How well does my representative have knowledge of the industry? I guess less important than it was on the captive side, but still important from a bank perspective. How well do they know my dealership? And then how clear is their communication? So very similar, but you see much smaller percentages comparatively, but overall the higher percentage at 58% of the total 55% means that the sales rep on the banking side of the business is considered the face of the bank. They represent the bank and the bank's programs. We look at the credit staff side of the business, so 42% of the 55, again, how responsive are they? Are they able to restructure applications? Again, a little less need there because typically bank programs are built around a very structured risk tolerance. So if the sales rep is appropriately discussing what that risk tolerance is, the sales communicates that back to credit, and credit manages that appropriately. Dealers understand that there's only going to be a subset of the applications I'm going to get to be able to restructure. How well does my credit staff understand my dealership? How knowledgeable are the industry? And how clear are their communications? For the last couple of years prior to my arrival at J.D. Power, we talked at length about you needed to have a proprietary buyer, a single point of contact every time I have an application coming in. We have found over the last several years that that's not necessarily that important from a satisfaction perspective. It'd be nice if you could dedicate a buyer to every dealer or a number of buyers to every dealer or some combination thereof, but we understand from an efficiency perspective, it's necessary to have teams. What we have found, though, is those lenders that tend to understand and communicate who their team members are, have those reps visit those dealerships, understand who my point of contact is, whether it's A, B, C, D, or E, because they're part of the team, creates a much higher level of satisfaction. So we talk about the actual KPIs, and we've talked about this in the scorecards, and we'll talk about this when we come out and visit each of the subscribers. But we really pulled out some KPIs that we think are really important, and I wanted to point these out and think about the individual components of a KPI, right? So that first KPI, Sales rep visits the dealership at the preferred frequency. So 84% of the industry average says yes, that's occurring. The OSAT impact to that is 107, and the break point is 47. So if you look at what you could think about in terms of where am I going to make my focus, I'm looking at my actionable KPIs on the captive side, I'd say that's a very high opportunity. Sales rep exceeds expectation for facilitation and contract problem resolution. Again, this is a little bit internally controversial for us because the satisfaction is high when the sales reps are delivering on that KPI. However, it takes away from the sales rep ability to sell the value proposition of the bank. So there needs to be a fundamental change in terms of where that first call of contact goes in and who can resolve that problem. We recommend that there be some empowerment at the credit desk level to resolve those problems. That's a slow process. We don't advocate immediate change because dealers are conditioned to do things a certain way. I think everybody out there today can say at the bottom of every one of my communications I have to my dealers, if you have any questions, please contact your sales rep. There needs to be a way to move that problem resolution out of the sales world into the internal operational world and allow them to sell. On the credit staff side, always able to reach credit staff when needed. We've talked about this now for 2 years. We saw last year was the first year we saw a net negative, a decline in this. We saw that both in the U.S. and Canada. We came out and talked to you folks and said, hey, look, this is an issue. We saw a positive increase this year, but it's still very important. And it's very necessary for dealers to understand that when they have an issue, they can reach somebody immediately. It doesn't happen often, right? So as we've created all these efficient processes by which we can approve applications, communicate cash contracts, it's the one-off deal that has a problem that needs to be resolved immediately, and dealers are saying, I'm very satisfied if I can pick up the phone and get a hold of somebody immediately. And the most recent contract problem or issue resolved within the first contact. So if I'm not calling my sales rep, I'm calling my buyer, and I say, hey, you know what, I got a problem with this. You need to be able to resolve that first time, right? It shouldn't be a transfer. It shouldn't be a, let me get somebody back to you. Let me go to my supervisor. Maybe you go to your supervisor, but then the whole aspect of hold time and how long you're on the phone. Ultimately, you want to have an opportunity to be able to resolve that. Again, this year that was a new question we asked based on your feedback at the roundtable.
And it's the highest break point of any KPI, that new question.
So this is one of those ones, again, I hate to say it's controversial, but it sort of creates a bit of an internal discussion amongst yourselves to say, okay, when I think about an exception, and I'll use that term because we're closed caption here amongst ourselves, if I think about something that fits outside the box, how willing and able am I to empower somebody to resolve that first time through? So every one of you has a different sort of perspective on that. Our perspective is the more empowerment you can put to the frontline people and document and then manage back to that, right? You check the checkers on the exceptions they're making or the things they're doing is much more appropriate from the dealer perspective and their perception of, wow, lender A, every time I call, I have a problem, Billy resolves it every single time.
And I also believe that we have warm transfer in here as well, that if you contact the credit desk and that rep can't answer that question, but they get an immediate decision maker on the phone, we are seeing that within the data as well.
So when we move to the non-captive actionable KPIs, there's a much larger list here. Some of them are duplicative in a way, but as you think about what we showed earlier from the model perspective and how much emphasis that dealers place on the sales rep, there's much more sales rep relationship KPIs that we think are actionable. Now, on the far right-hand side, the breakpoints aren't huge, but the OSAP impacts are, right? So am I visiting at the right frequency? Am I contacting appropriately via email at the right frequency? Am I able or willing to facilitate restructure of an application or finding somebody that can help me do that, right? Again, that's the controversial one that we think should take out of the sales rep world and put it back into the operational world. Am I making sure that my dealers are aware of program changes I make? Sales rep exceeds expectation for training clarification. In training and clarification of programs, dealers want to understand any change you make to your program and train on that. and you think about that, it's probably a larger KPI, but it doesn't show up on the captive side, but it shows up on the non-captive side. You think about leasing in the non-captive world, it's not there. So they want to be trained on your programs. They want to understand, and this goes a little bit off the KPI chart, they want to understand how their portfolio performs for the bank. So as you think about your credit policy and what you're trying to build as a portfolio, dealers want to make sure their portfolio is as pristine as the next dealer, because every client that comes through their dealership, they believe is the best client ever, and they want that client to come back to them, and they want you to be able to reapprove them when they come back to buy another car. And again, sales rep exceeds expectation for contract problem resolution. Again, we think that the resolution of, we think the facilitation of should be moved internally, but at the current juncture where dealers are interacting with lenders, they need to understand that that has to change, not immediately. And again, we listed these from an industry average. You see the numbers drop dramatically from the top to the bottom. So you go from 80% industry average, which is the yes and no difference, versus 36% at the bottom, which is a yes or no difference. So again, opportunity. And if your sales reps don't have the ability to facilitate a contract problem resolution or renegotiate or facilitate a restructure of the application, you better be out there telling them that, Mr. Dealer, we don't do that. This is what we do. And create that value proposition up front. Again, we drop down to credit staff relationship. It's 42%. Again, not as high as you see in the captive world. Again, always able to reach credit staff when needed. It doesn't matter if you're captive or non-captive. I need to be able to pick up the phone and contact somebody when I have a problem, or I need a question answered, or I have a customer sitting in front of me that showed up with $1,000 less of a down payment than they thought they had, and they're willing to walk down the street because they think they got approved by somebody else. Again, most recent contract or problem resolution within the first contact. Again, the new question this year, very important for dealers to understand that they get the question answered or the problem resolved when I pick up the phone once. And again, to Patrick's point earlier, if that's a soft transfer, if that's a hold on, I can get somebody else, that's great. It's the I'll call you back later, or I'll give you an answer, I can't do that for you, I'll have somebody else call you, is not resolving that particular problem.
And this is Lisa Steinbeck. I'll just comment on the side real fast, and it's something that you already mentioned, Jim, but to really drive the point home, if you look at these three columns, what you're looking at in the industry average is what % of the time this KPI is being met. And so what Jim has said is that there's a lot to be desired in that grouping of sales rep KPIs that are in the 30% range. That's pretty low for something that J.D. Power has identified as a key performance indicator, meaning it is highly impactful to satisfaction. That's a pretty low meet rate by research standards. So that's telling you that there's a big opportunity to grab there. That second column, the OSAT impact, is the difference between when a dealer says their lender is meeting that KPI and when their lender is not meeting that KPI. So it's all about potential lift. But those are some pretty big numbers. And Jim, you mentioned that too. Those are, 140, 139. Those are really big swings. What that tells me is there's some really high performers out there that are really knocking it out of the park. So all those people that are doing it, some are doing it really, really well, and there's some opportunity to grab some learnings there. The third column, the break point, is essentially a regression analysis. It's like looking at the bubble chart that Jim showed you that says, here's how important relationship is and the credit staff is, the 40%, the 60%. While these numbers are not percentages, it means the same thing. So this is mathematically, if you will, how these KPIs influence overall satisfaction. So as we sit down with you guys individually as a continuation from today's meeting, we'll want to do an analysis on where you perform relative to this equation to say, here's where you can get the biggest bang for your buck. And we can do that using the tools that we provide to you, like the simulator, as well as, some of our consultative nature that we have that we can work and partner with you on. So I wanted to make sure to mention that. I know that you guys are pretty familiar with the mathematics that we have in the study, but this is a really interesting slide to pause and think about that.
So to sort of play on what Lisa had said in 100% in agreement, because if you think about, and we tried to put together a slide that was illustrative of the fact that if you took the top performers and you threw them into a hopper, and you took their product offering and you took their application approval process, they were relatively flat from a differential perspective, right? So a few points here, a few points there. You guys are all in the same boat when it comes to application approvals, right? They go pretty quick. The contract caching is really quick. The product offering changes, but not dramatically, right? It alters back and forth. But the biggest differentiator, as the study shows, and as your scores show, if you look at top to bottom in history, was around the relationship. So the more focused your sales calls, the more directed your sales calls, the more responsive your credit desk is or was, is what drives the highest level of satisfaction. And we think about the battery of questions we asked last year that said, this is when my dealer wants my rep in the store, and this is how long I want them in the store, and these are the days they shouldn't be here, these are the days they should be here. That should be documented. You should be able to pick up a sales rep in one of your provinces and drop them in the other province and be able to say, these are my 15 new dealers I call on, or 20, or whatever the number is, and I understand exactly what his or her needs are because they've told me that and we've documented that. So, we think the path to success for lenders is built on really three things, right? So the alignment of sales and credit staff with dealer needs, and this has always been sort of a, sales drives everything, credit sort of sits behind the scenes. We think it should be a communicative sort of combination of the two, a single voice, all in concert. This includes everyone regardless of their role, so that goes beyond just sales and credit. It's dealer-facing and non-dealer facing. Two, we think the prioritization and execution and relationship performance deltas, make sure what is important gets done and is communicated to all parties. Make your customers aware, make your employees aware, and include both in decision-making process. Why are you doing this and how are we going to get it done collectively? And the third piece is customer focus and alignment with the organization. Corporate goals should be aligned with dealer focused and managed appropriately. So understanding where dealers are going, what their goals are, how many cars they wish to sell, how many of those cars are going to finance, and ultimately how many of those contracts can I acquire during that period of time. Last piece here is a dealer optimization platform. So we've identified this. We're going to call it, our name is iBeam. Patrick has coined that phrase. I'm going to let Patrick walk you through that right now.
Okay. The J.D. Power Dealer Relationship Optimization Platform, or iBeam, was designed to maximize the effectiveness of the two most important dealer touch points, the retail credit and sales rep, by forging a direct path to capture greater dealer satisfaction. What we try to do is identify any relationship performance deltas by examining the DFS study results. We perform executive and frontline interviews and along with dealer interviews. We build an action plan around specific initiatives to close those deltas by prioritizing deltas from the DFS study and results from the J.D. Power industry expert recommendations. Between Jim, myself, and Lisa, we're talking 70 years of experience within the auto finance and in the research industries. We look to engage dealer-facing employees, aligning with one message. It's important that dealers understand it's a simple message. It's one message. How are you? What is your value proposition to that dealer? And we do suggest that it's launched with a company alignment of that value proposition. Within 4 to 6 months after that, we look to assess the progress, qualitative and quantitative health check on change and progress as to how the dealers are receiving that message and the frontline employees as well. And then we would measure the results through the DFS study, trending analysis year over year, and that's based on the syndicated cycle. This consulting engagement has multiple options available, and we'd be more than happy to set up some time individually to discuss further.
I think it's important for everyone to understand that this is not about, I simply want to improve my score in the J.D. Power study. This is about improving your business platform by which you engage dealers. And that could be a subset of one piece. It could be just the sales side. It could just be the retail side. Or it could be a larger engagement looking at the entire business. It could be, how do I improve my margins? It could be, how do I improve other aspects of my business? So this is not about simply, I'd like to improve my score by 15 points so I'm number one in the study. This is about improving your business overall for now in the next 2, 3, 4 years, because I think, as I've said, and I think, you guys read and we all kind of agree, that the current sales rate cannot be sustained. If it is sustained, it's going to be sustained on artificial practices that I don't think any of us really want to go down, right? We don't want to go down the 120-month loan. We don't want to keep the margins at the net negative that they are in some cases. And we want to make sure that we build a sustainable business that is year after year after year delivering what our corporate goal is.
I believe that many of you are currently engaging in initiatives around relationship in all different forms and fashion. And the challenge that I would have for you is to say, is there a benefit to having a third-party independent view of those initiatives to help align with what dealers really think is most important, and then having a third-party view to help you vet and prioritize that list of how you're going to make change happen. And that's the most difficult part of any consulting engagement. Anyone can come in and sit with you and examine data and give you a set of priorities and give you a list to run and go with. What's different here is the long-term partnership that we would have with you to ensure execution, to do frequent checkbacks around the relationship, to have qualitative conversations with your executives, with your credit team, with your sales team as you go through. Maybe evolution isn't the right word, but a movement internally to align with this feeling that relationship is going to drive the long-term success of your business. And that's the message we really want to articulate with you today. So if you guys wanted to, make this a part of your syndicated presentations where we etch out an hour, we're coming on site to do the meetings with you. If you want to etch out an hour to just kind of frame this up and just have a friendly conversation, that's a great time to take advantage of that face-to-face meeting that we have. So nothing we have to figure out today. I have almost all of your presentations on the books already, so we can think about how that might look and take advantage of the time together.
So it would appear as though we have no questions that came in during the presentation. That's either we nailed it and gave you everything you needed, or you have some other things you'd like to ask offline. We're happy for either way. Again, as Lisa stated, we're happy to include some of this stuff in your executive presentation from a bigger picture perspective. It's really about creating, the value proposition that you have at the dealer level and enforcing that across the organization and making some sort of company-wide mantras that everyone sort of gets aligned behind that drives better business practices. So with that, I think I would say thank you for taking the time to listen to us today. We're happy to provide more information as we go, but this is our first foray into sort of putting together a midterm discussion, post scorecards before executive presentations, and as you have questions, feel free to send them in and we'll answer them as we can. So with that, I say thank you very much. Appreciate your time today.